Good afternoon, and welcome to our second installment of the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative Micro-Credential Summit. We're excited to have our previous participants back, and we see some new faces or new names in there, and so we find that we were glad that you could join us today. As a personal point of pride, I'm very excited about today. We talk often about creating professional learning systems that are created for our educators and our students, that's in a collaborative approach. So what this session is about is how KVEC brought teachers, principals, other leaders together at the regional level to create micro-credentials based upon the needs established through data reviews, looking at different information that we have from surveys, etc., and fine-tune our professional learning to get to those teachers the tools that they need for their student success. So we have you see our panel in front of us there. So we look forward to hearing from Vonda Adams, Dion Bates, Desi Bowling, Sarah Bowen, Jennifer Carroll, Will Cayetan, Denny Palme, and Anna Prince. So they come from a wide variety of experiences, from our regional experiences through our school leadership, and through, we also have an interview with a teacher who was involved in the creation of micro-credentials as well within this presentation. So we're excited to hear about this and how they're using micro-credentials and what was created to change the professional landscape of their schools, but most importantly, how it's impacting the students in their classrooms. So the way this session will pan out today is we'll start looking at the data and what was the reasons for developing a stack of micro-credentials for dealing with rural students of poverty. Then we'll move on to our special ed stack and talk about the collaboration that occurred in the development of that as well, and hear from our principals and our teacher. And then finally, we'll get into the research that went along simultaneously with the development of the stack. Hear the surveys and the results of what occurred as these micro-credentials were being developed. We have our chat room function, so please feel free to add questions throughout the session in the chat room, and we'll answer those as we can. Also use the chat room as an ability or a time to reach out to others in your private conversations, to make networks with others. This is a great opportunity to network across the states with those who are in our networking group. Also, before we begin, take this time to introduce yourself through chat. Tell us where you're from, what states. It looks like we have folks here from all across the United States, from east to west coast and all the way up to Hawaii. Aloha. So please take time to go on and introduce yourself. We also have chat monitors who will be monitoring questions, so please ask your questions as we go through this presentation, and we will try to get those responded as we go through the sessions as well. But first up through our presentation will be Dr. Desi Bowling, who will be sharing with you the data and the reasons why we decided to move into the micro-credentials with dealing with rural students of poverty. So Dr. Bowling, I will stop sharing my screen and I'll turn this over to you.
Way forward. And on your screen, you'll see where you will be able to access this. And we encourage you to read this, because I think that Eastern Kentucky is like many rural regions across the country, and rural regions have been on a decline for a long time due to the lack of jobs and economic opportunities. And when you try to talk to policymakers about that, it helps to have actual data and timely research. And so we hope that you will go on our network at theholler.org, and you can download this PDF version. So whenever we're talking about micro-credentials and why this is important, we shared with you who we are as an educational cooperative and where we're located. And because of this rural location where we are located, micro-credentials are one part of a comprehensive approach that we developed after digesting the data in the Way Forward report. And the micro-credentials are one way that our educators can have professional learning opportunities that are relevant to an area of identified need at the school level or on a personal level. And at KVEC, we're committed to helping our educators be able to increase their level of skill so that they can provide those exceptional learning experiences for all students. And what we learned as we put together this Way Forward report was, one, we have quite a bit of educator turnover. Our district level people tell us that they have difficulty in attracting and retaining experienced teachers. And it could be because of the isolation and scale here in our rural region that educators wear many hats, and sometimes the pay is not as good as in some of the larger areas. So that encourages teachers to be able to move on then whenever they have that opportunity. And also, many of the people who are being placed in special needs classrooms are on those alternative certificate pathways. And so that's why we knew that it was important to put resources into micro-credentials for those educators who are working with rural students of poverty and educators who are working with special needs students, because that way we're better able to ensure equitable opportunities for all. Now this slide is quite telling. And what this slide shows is the 2017 poverty rates for all congressional districts across the nation. And as educators, I know that all of us look at data around this event or that situation, and then we'll try to take care of that problem, and then we put it away. But after we did the Way Forward report, and I saw all that data compiled in one report, I must confess that I was actually stunned. And so when you look at where we're at on this map, and you see the state of Kentucky, and in that purple, that dark purple area, you can see that, you know, the 2017 poverty rate was at 25% or more. And across the nation, then you'll see that also a little bit Mississippi and Arkansas, you know, Texas down around the border, and a little bit out in California in one spot. But that's quite telling. And so for us, you know, that was certainly an imperative to act and to try to make some improvements in our schools and for our kids. And the 5th congressional districts where KVEC is, all of our counties are in that 5th congressional district, and we have ranked the 3rd highest nationally for the percentage of population being in poverty. And that's, you know, that's just, that's sad, really. So we've got to work hard to help our kids overcome the barriers that may entail. So we wanted to just put up a couple slides just so that you could see why it is important that we do the work that we do around with the rural students of poverty and the special education micro-credentials. This slide also is quite telling. This is the U.S. Census data from 1999 and 2017. And as you can see, many counties in our KVEC region saw an increase in the percentage of children under 18 in poverty. 12 counties in KVEC region are in the top 5% of all counties in the nation for the highest levels of child poverty. And this one, I must confess, it kind of made me stop and think. And when we have policymakers in the state of Kentucky going around and making statements that Kentucky's economy was on the rise, well, that might be so. In central Kentucky and northern Kentucky counties, they do have a growing economy because they have airports, they have the Toyota, there's 5 or 6 four-year universities along I-75. And so while the rest of Kentucky may be improving, the eastern Kentucky region is not. And this slide, when we gathered that data and was able to see that, It was quite telling. And I think that all Kentuckians should be asking why. Why is this happening? Why is this continuing to happen? And then how can we work together on solutions? And that's what we need to be asking our policymakers. This slide on this one, it is just the report on personal income, and it just shows from Northern Kentucky region down to the mountains where we're at. And so when we're thinking about how we form relationships with our students and all of the barriers that poverty entails, this is just a slide, another one of those impactful slides that shows the disparity within our own state. And finally, this slide is from the Kentucky Department of Education school report card, and it reflects any number of national studies regarding the relationship between poverty and special education. Now, these numbers don't represent the students' inability to learn. What they do support is the need for additional educational experiences and required targeted resources to help students. And I wanted to put this one in there because with all of that negative statistical evidence showing the poverty levels in Eastern Kentucky and how much harder that students and teachers here work to help students overcome those barriers and get some equitable resources, this is quite telling as well. Our schools here in this region are doing well, and we use multiple measures to determine school success. And two of the most important ones for both the learner and building community vitality are graduation rates and college and career readiness. And as you can see, collectively, the school districts in the KVEC region have a higher college and career readiness level than the state average. And so our schools are doing well. And then I think that with the work that is taking shape around the micro-credentials to where our teachers are learning skills that can help them help students, then we will continue to have these good graduation rates and college and career readiness levels. Now I put this one back up here because with all the data that we have here and all of this compelling information that we found as we developed our comprehensive support system for schools, we knew that we had to make that intentional effort to put resources toward helping our diverse learners in rural and impoverished areas here that we have in Eastern Kentucky. I want to thank Sarah and Anna for joining us today. And now Dr. Jennifer Carroll is going to talk more about the micro-credential stack for educators of students in rural poverty. And joining her to exceptional principals from Lawrence County, Sarah Bowen and Anna Prince.
Oh, thank you very much, Desi. And I'm not going to take a lot of our time because I know that you would much rather hear from these two amazing ladies who are here to present with us today. But I just want to make a connection between the data and the landscape that Desi has shared with us and then how that is sort of merged into some of the work that we are doing with micro-credentials. So as Desi said, KVEC is a non-regulatory service organization. So our districts choose to be members of KVEC. And they choose to be a member of our cooperative because we really seek to provide personalized solutions for problems of practice that they have. We, in our state, which I'm sure we aren't the Lone Rangers in this, we're getting ready to start our third biennium of having $0 for professional learning. So in our state budget, there is not money for professional development. However, our teachers have a mandate for 24 hours of professional learning every year. And that leaves people grasping at solutions. And we want to provide them the very best solutions rather than just what is available for free. We really work to help our schools create personalized systems of professional learning so that they're really working to target both the individual needs of their teachers and their school level needs according to their data. And one way that we really try to engage our school staff in that type of personalized professional learning is through networks. And at KVEC, we have several of those. We have some role-specific networks where we work with principals or instructional supervisors or counselors or new teachers. So we have role-specific groups where we really work to let those people help develop their own professional learning networks and try to drive the agenda of those meetings based on the needs of those folks, based on what they are telling us. But then we also have networks around solutions, trying to find solutions to problems of practice. And one of those networks that we have is activating catalytic transformation. And through that network, we work with school level teams to help them sift through all of their data to identify a problem of practice that everyone in that school has an entry point into, something that they can all pull together to work on so that they might move their school forward, that they might advance student outcomes, and that they might advance professional practice. And we know a key element of that theory of action as those schools develop a plan is professional learning. So that is sort of how micro-credentials bubbled to the surface as we worked diligently to try to find the best solutions for professional learning for the teachers in our region, for the administrators in our region. Those networks really helped us through qualitative and quantitative data, looking at their school level data, looking at their district level data, to really realize that we, of course, have a lot of gaps around students of poverty, but we also have to consider where we're at. We have to consider the rurality of our region as well. And just like all rural areas are not the same, all poverty is not the same. And so that led us through the fact that we have a lot of staff here at KVEC that have some very unique experiences around and qualifications around teaching rural students of poverty. Dr. Desi Bowling, who you just heard from, and Bernadette Carpenter are actually national trainers for the Ruby Payne Bridges Out of Poverty. And then we have staff who have had training with Eric Jensen and with Jim Knight. And we have folks that bring a very unique skill set to the table. And so we wanted to really capitalize on that and capitalize sort of on our niche where we are in terms of the rural and the poverty to create some personalized professional learning experiences for our teachers that would really help them to understand what teaching rural students of poverty really entailed. What are those skills and competencies that teachers in a rural area who teach students of poverty need to have? And so out of that work grew a growing stack of micro-credentials. And I wanted to take a minute just to show you, I am on the Digital Promise page right now. So we have a contractual agreement with Digital Promise, which is a wonderful relationship, because without their support and their vetting, we would not have the high quality micro-credentials that we have. So we're very blessed to have those folks working with us as we go through this development work. But I'm going to go down, and as I look at the issuing organizations, I'm going to go down to the Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. So I just wanted you to be able to see where I was going to get to our micro-credentials. And I'm going to scroll up to the teaching rural students from poverty. So this is a stack, and you'll see a little image here that shows you that this is a stack, and you see some spaces because we have some more micro-credentials coming in this stack. But the one I wanted to show you, because what we heard from folks who were going to be participating in this work is that they wanted to really lay their eyes on some micro-credentials. And I wanted you to be able to see how this micro-credential grew out of the work that we are doing with our schools and districts. So we know, just like I said, there are different types of rural, there are also different types of poverty. And our teachers come from varying backgrounds. And even if they also come from poverty, they may not come from the same kind of poverty. And they may not understand the impact that being in a rural area also has on poverty. So what this micro-credential is really about, and you can see up at the top, the competency that is listed here underneath the apply button, is that in this micro-credential, an educator is going to demonstrate their knowledge of different poverty types and how those affect student learning. And through the key method, the way that the educator is going to demonstrate their knowledge and their competency is they're going to analyze student data to deepen their understanding of the different types of poverty, and then create a data visualization to communicate those new insights about the students that they serve. So the next element of this micro-credential, which by the way does follow the National Design Principles for Micro-Credentials that was created by a collaborative that included a lot of partners from Digital Promise, CCSSO, Learning Forward, and KVEC was lucky enough to be asked to be at the table in this work around the design, implementation, and assessment principles for micro-credentials. So the next component is method components. And this is, I'm going to show my age with this when I tell you that I really view this section as sort of like the cliff notes for the micro-credential. This is the framework of learning that an educator would have, the knowledge that an educator would have in order to be able to demonstrate this skill or competency. It is not all-encompassing. It's not all exclusive. There are other things that an educator would have to know, and that learning is found underneath in the supporting research and resources. So this gives the educator the tools that they would need for the data aggregation, the data analysis, and then the creating of the data visualization. And you see up here, as I told you, the things that the educator is going to have to do is to analyze student data to determine the kinds of poverty that exist in their classroom. So here are the types of data that we're really encouraging that educator to look at. And you'll see it's different data than what typically teachers are looking at. So it's really getting into the actual physical location. I'm thinking about a map. Where does the student live? What are the occupations of their parents or their guardians? Who are they living with? Who is their guardianship? Is it grandparents? Is it foster parents? Is it siblings? Because in our area, we have a lot of students who are living with someone other than their parents. But then also thinking about intervention or tutoring data. Who is staying after school for tutoring? Who is receiving interventions? Which students are those? And then maybe even some student perception data, some student survey data to really involve student agency in this conversation. And so this then leads teachers to thinking about, so how do I collect this data and put it into a type of visualization so that I can start to draw conclusions based on this data. And so this tells a teacher a little bit about creating a data visualization, but then there are resources here that an educator can go to learn more about that. And then about how to share the findings. What are some possible ways that I could get this new information into the hands of other educators and other stakeholders who are really interested in serving these individual students? And, you know, I think about this from a classroom teacher perspective. A lot of times in the classroom, we start to gather data about students, but we kind of do it in a haphazard kind of way. Like you may learn, oh, this student has a dad who is in prison, and oh, this student is right now living with their grandparents. And then the teacher going down the hall might tell you, did you know that Joey's mom is sick and is in the hospital? And so you start to collect this data, but it's sort of haphazard. This gives teachers a sort of a directed amount of time to sit down and really collect those pieces of data that they need about each of their individual students and put it into some sort of a format that makes sense to them and helps them look for conclusions in the data. And so then the next part of this micro-credential, following the design principles, is the actual submission process. What is it that an educator is going to submit to reflect that they have developed a competency in this area? So ours are typically in 3 sections. We use all 3 sections. The first is an overview where the educator really reflects on their role, why they selected this micro-credential, what's the learning need that they're trying to address, why it's important to them to engage in this type of learning. So this sets the context, it sets the learning stage for the micro-credential. And then the next level is the actual submission of evidence and artifacts. So this is the work samples. And so going back to what we said this micro-credential is about, the educator is going to submit their data visualization, and then they're going to talk about how they collected the data. They're going to reflect on how they organized it, what were their findings, and then how did they share it, and how is that sharing impacting services to students. And then the last part, we always include the part 3 reflection, which is about how has engaging and understanding this types of poverty, how's it impacting your professional practice, and how is it impacting student outcomes. Those are really those two things that we're always looking for in professional learning. How has it changed your practice? And then how has that change in practice impacted student outcomes? And we always have a rubric. So this one, I saw someone post a question in the chat box earlier about rubrics. This one would actually tells a teacher what they need to do in order to pass this element of the submission. And then this one, again, it tells them not yet, almost, and yes, in terms of helping them to understand what they need to do in order to fully demonstrate their skill or competency. So all of ours do use rubrics. And as I said before, Digital Promise is very helpful in helping us to kind of think through this and make sure that we are meeting those design principles, and that this truly is, that all of the micro-credentials that we create are a true reflection of a demonstrated skill and competency. So going back to the stacks that KVEC is working on, you see that the two that we have so far in our teaching rural students from poverty is that around building relationships with students and then understanding types of poverty. We have another one that is soon to be released, and it is around culturally responsive pedagogy. So what are those teaching strategies that you really use in order to consider where students are culturally, and so that you're cognizant and that you are addressing the culturally responsive pedagogy. And then we have two more that are being developed. The next one in the stack would be learning structures. And those are those tools that students can use that can help put them in charge of their learning, that give them some ownership in terms of learning and assessment. And then the last is one on interventions, because something that we have found in working with our schools is that a lot of times interventions are viewed by students and sometimes even parents as being punitive. If a student needs interventions and supports, then it's like, well, I didn't get it the first time, so now I'm being punished and have to do it again. But how do we create systems of interventions that are not negative, they're not punitive, that are really viewed as a additional layer of support? And so that will be the last one in that stack. And so I said I wasn't going to talk long, and I talked a lot longer than I wanted to. I want to go back, and we have had the distinct pleasure of working with some pretty amazing principals, and two of those amazing principals took time to be with us today, and I really do appreciate it. They are both very forward thinking in that they really work to create systems of professional learning in their schools, so that professional learning truly does become part of that continuous school improvement cycle. And so I really would like to let you hear from them about how they introduced micro-credentials to their teachers, how they supported teachers in earning micro-credentials, and a little bit about the impact that micro-credentialing is having in their schools. And so I'm not sure which one wants to go first. I think I'm going to ask Anna, if she will go first. And then if they will, and they can, sort of tag team, because the great thing about it is they used to teach across the hall from each other, and now there are principals in buildings that are in the same district. They're not close together, because remember, we're rural and we're spaced out, but they're in two schools in the same district. So with that, I would like to introduce Miss Anna Prince, who is the principal at Louisa East Elementary School.
Hi, Jennifer.
Hi, Yay!
Well, I'm Anna Prince, and I'm from Louisa, Kentucky. I'm a principal of a school that hosts 2nd through 5th graders. We started with micro-credentials about 2 years ago. When I joined the work with the ACT grant, I personally earned the one on the finding your problem of practice in schools. And then last year, we moved into allowing teachers to start with micro-credentials. And this was where I focused on our teacher leads at the school, trying to get their buy-in and see their feedback from those that they have gathered. Now, I had probably 5 teachers complete those last year. Some chose to complete 3 micro-credentials, and some only completed 1. And those varied. They looked on the stacks, the different ones that were offered, and found ones that they found interesting or felt like they needed professional development in. Last year, I did offer an incentive to my teachers through our ACT grant, and teachers earned a $100 stipend for completing those. This year, we chose to use one of our professional development days as an entire staff and dedicated that to a micro-credential. Now, teachers were given the task and assignment of completing the Understanding Poverty micro-credential, and we felt like that would be beneficial for our students. That way, the teachers understood where their students came from. So I had 34 teachers complete this micro-credential. We set a time frame for teachers to complete the different portions of it, broke it down into the 3 different sections, and I found that that was easier for our teachers to move forward with it. It didn't seem as daunting for them to complete the entire thing at one time. Teachers completed it by Christmas, and they earned their PD day. That was a flex day for our district. They did not have to come in person to a professional development that was assigned in February. So through the course of time, they were able to complete that. Now, I had lots of feedback from our teachers, and the Understanding Poverty micro-credential allowed them to see the different environment, the different students' characteristics and where they're coming from, the different types of poverty in their homeroom. As Jennifer mentioned before, a lot of times we learn different things, bits and pieces about our students throughout the year, but it's not as formalized in knowing and understanding. And teachers had to go back and also tell all of those who were involved in their education what they found out about their class. So that was very impactful for our students and for our teachers, especially moving into our NTI, or non-traditional instruction. We were able to kind of have a better understanding of where our students were coming from, who would be helping our students at home as they were learning from home. So it was great for our students, and obviously we didn't know that when we selected this micro-credential to start with. I'm sure Sarah can also have some input on that too. She had a different micro-credential at her school.
I'm a principal at Fallsburg Elementary in Lawrence County, and we are a K-8 school with about 300 students. And this is the first year when we began micro-credentials. It was kind of, I just put it out there for teachers to decide if they wanted to do it or not. So I probably had about 6 or 7 that participated in that the first year. But this past year, and it's just kind of like what Ms. Prince said, all of my teachers were given a micro-credential that I chose, and that was the building relationships, because that micro-credential went with my problem of practice through the ACT. That's a little network group that Jennifer was talking about, and that went right along with my problem of practice because we were working on coaching groups, data with students, and so I thought it was important that teachers were able to build those relationships with students. So it took them to a new level of how to do that with students. So each one of my teachers completed that micro-credential. And just like Anna said, I'm kind of tagging on with her. We had a timeline. Teachers had to do that. And it also was counted for a PD day. it really took teachers out of their comfort zone, which was amazing to watch. I know Jennifer and I had lots of conversations about this. Some of my best teachers, teachers that I put on a pedestal, were coming to me in awe, really. They were so intrigued by being challenged in a different way. Because, you know, we sit at PDs and we're all guilty of it. We sit in PDs and we're bored out of our minds. You know, some things don't pertain to us necessarily, and that's just how it is. But this was a way for teachers to really personalize their own professional development. I know Anna and I talked about, you know, this next year even, and letting them choose the micro-credential that they want to choose and link that to their PGP, their professional growth plan. And so, you know, we, as teachers and administrators, we always talk about personalized learning for students, but this has allowed us to have personalized learning for our teachers. And it's just been a great learning process for teachers and myself and Anna together, but it's been great. And so I'm excited to see next year how it all pans out with them choosing working on there. And also, teachers didn't do it individually. They had a choice. They could work with a partner also. So they didn't have to do it. They weren't loners working on this professional development, this micro-credential. So some of them chose to do it individually. Some of them chose to do it in partners, but they each completed their own micro-credential.
Yeah. Thank you both very much. And I want to go back to a couple of things that you all both talked about. And one was that you faced that challenge of how do you credential learning in terms of the currency of time, because in our state we are required to have 24 hours of professional learning. So that's one of the challenges that administrators are dealing with, is how do we turn micro-credentials into that professional learning time. And so you all took the approach of, as teachers worked on one micro-credential, that would count as one of their days. But undoubtedly, they spent many days working on the micro-credential. So that was good that you all had that kind of common understanding about the currency of time as compared to the currency of learning. And then I really, I loved what Anna said about how that micro-credential, about understanding their kids and where they were coming from and what their home life was like and what situations they were in, how that impacted their ability to address those students when we had to go home and resort to virtual learning, how it really helped prepare them for that type of instruction. I was, that it was, so that was based on a need that we didn't even know we had until that need arose. And so that's a great connection to that. And then I just want to say that these ladies don't give themselves near enough credit, because their teachers were successful because of the support that those principals provided. They really created opportunities for those teachers to work together. I think you said that your teachers were intrigued by how difficult this work was. Intrigued is a very nice word, because they were really freaked out because you take teachers who are so used to school and so used to doing good school work. Teachers always get A's on all their assignments. They've always done that. And then they're faced with a competency-based task where they really have to demonstrate their proficiency. That takes people out of their comfort zone. But you all created situations where your teachers felt comfortable. They worked with each other. They coached each other up. When it came time for submission, if someone was having trouble uploading or doing anything, they helped each other. So principles and that leadership that you all provided to the work really helped your teachers get to that point where they were successful with the micro-credential. So now they're okay with doing it again, that they see what this type of professional learning looks like. So I just wanted to make sure that you all get the shout outs that you deserve for what you've done. And I'm going to turn it back over to Robert, because I could brag on these two all day.
And I wish we had time for all these sessions. I know there's other questions going on, but these principals are awesome. It's like I was talking to today. They're rock stars with this work. And speaking of rock stars, our next session on our special education stack is full of rock stars as well, between our collaborations among our administrators, our teachers, and our leaders within our organization. And at this point, we're going to turn this over to Dion Bates, Denny Paul, and Vonda Adams. So Dion, we're ready to go.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I'm going to share my screen. So my name's Dion Bates, and I'm the Implementation and Improvement Lead in the Special Education Department here at KVEC. And I have with me some of our team, specifically today, Denny Paul May and Vonda Adams are going to talk a little bit about their experience. But we want to just talk through what that looked like in terms of that development of a micro-credential and how that looked like for our special education. So we started out thinking about the topics that we were going to focus on for the micro-credential development. We know that it was a need, and we really wanted that focus to be for how we improve outcomes for students with disabilities. So we started looking at some sources of data that we had. We had some practitioner feedback. We have some results from regional needs assessment. And then we also had another piece around what support we're going to use for new and emerging special education teachers, and then also for our experienced special educators. So we had those collaborative conversations. We looked at those data sources, and we tried to make decisions about what was most appropriate, what was most relevant and timely to support special education teachers in our region. So in addition to that, we thought about not only is it just special education teachers, but we also want to make sure we included the supports for regular ed teachers, because they are also teachers of special education students. So we wanted to make sure that we really considered all of those components. So that's kind of where we started off with that data. And we have those regional practitioners that are right here from the KVEC service area that were partners with, they were partnered with a teammate from our KVEC staff here. And so they were selected based on their field of expertise and their experience. And so we had a sample of special education teachers, but then we had specialist special education teachers, administrators. And for example, we had a specialist who specializes in providing supports for students with hearing impairments. So she helped author the micro-credential around collaboration. And so that collaboration was based on high leverage practices in special education. And so it was for how do we support students with a hearing impairment for students. So we help with teachers that are general ed teachers. They were targeted for special education teachers and related service providers. So it really encompassed lots of folks. And so some of the micro-credentials that we have are very, very focused like that. We have some that are in the content areas around literacy and around the Kentucky academic standards. We had some around mathematics. We had some around data analysis. So we had lots of different areas of expertise and experience in those areas. So as that process continued, we refer this to our collaborative process, because the training was a critical piece, because we really had to understand the components of that micro-credential development and understanding all of the pieces. And so that meant training for our teachers that were our practitioners in the region that are special educators, but that also meant some training for our KVEC staff so that we could support and coach along the way. So that started into our collaborative conversations. And so we started thinking, after we were trained, we started into the conversations around what do we know that are best practices in special education? What do we know are some credible resources that we have that we know would be good to share and to have experiences for all teachers? And so we started looking at state standards, but we looked specifically, at those professional practice standards for special educators, like through the Council for Exceptional Children. So we started looking at standards. We looked at what tools we already have in place. So we have, like, the Council for Exceptional Children had released those high leverage practices for special educators. So we started a foundation of those conversations around what research, what resources do we have that are really vetted and they're credible and they support new learning for our teachers, no matter what entry level they're at. So we started with that information, and then began those collaborative work sessions. And I know those that are on our team can speak to this, but sometimes in those collaborative work sessions, we had to go back and have those conversations again. We even had to go back and review those components and really dig in and understand. So it was a bit of a productive struggle for us to learn how to actually, put together that micro-credential, to really understand all of those components, and to really understand what that competency should look like, and so that there would be, some very deep learning and very personalized learning opportunities. So that was something that we spent a lot of time on. And again, it was back and forth, and we really was a learning curve for us. So then after we had those work sessions and we went back and forth in those processes, and again, that collaboration happened, then those practitioners put forth those drafts of the micro-credentials. So then we have drafts of the micro-credentials all around those specialized areas. And in there, we looked at we had some in-house vetting around those micro-credentials. And then like the one Jennifer talked about just a little bit ago about the national design principles, we looked at that. We also had some vetting with Digital Promise. But during all that time, that micro-credential development, we had that feedback occurring. So that learning was ongoing for us, for those regional practitioners, and just to make that a more authentic practice for us. But it really, I think, strengthen our knowledge even, and it really supported that. And here I'd like for us to talk just a little bit about, I know Denny Paul May and Vonda Adams are going to speak just a little bit about some of those lessons that we learned throughout that process of that development of the micro-credentials.
Yes, my name is Denny May, and I am a due process consultant here at Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. And one of the problems that we were identifying as we worked through compliance and also impacting student learning and teacher vision for their classroom, we have identified that progress monitoring was a huge topic. So the micro-credential that I worked on with another practitioner in a classroom here, Tyler Branham at Pikeville High School, we worked on the progress monitoring piece for two reasons, really: to try to learn more about progress monitoring, to make that connection between the methods of measurement and also what the verbs that we're trying to measure, the actions we're trying to see the students take. And so we wanted to strengthen that base around the four methods of measurement that appear in our IEP guidance document, which is our driving force behind the development of our individualized programs for students with disabilities. So we took that and we really started to dive into the research and look, after going through a lot of this collaborative process that Dion mentioned, understanding the process of developing the micro-credential and being able to really look at the, what is the competency that we hope to achieve, and looking at the research base, really pulling in the, the high leverage practices that were identified in the work by CC and the CEDAR group, the Collaborative Effective Educators Development Accountability Reform group. And then we also, Tyler and I, used the applied behavior analysis and data without tears as some strong research base for our developing this micro-credential around a real narrow focus. And we really, as we worked through those collaborative processes, we really had to think about making sure that it is a micro-credential. We didn't tackle the entire whole of the progress monitoring as it appears in the pages of the IEP guidance document. So what I mean by that is there's four different methods of measurement, and we really zeroed in on direct measurement. And so we were first identifying what that looked like. We looked at some tools that we could use, that we could identify. And then the hope was to then take that information, take that research, and really change our practice in our classroom, impact how we are collecting data, and developing that artifact, that visual representation that not only tells us, yes, hey, we are achieving the annual goals that we've set out in the IEP, but also that it's informing instructional decisions, and it's going to really tangibly impact what students are learning. And so that's really the process that we were able to go through. And, just the importance of data collection and how that really, really impacts student learning was a great process for us to go through.
Okay, and I am Vonda Adams. I'm also with KVEC. I'm one of the Achievement Gap Specialists in Math. And I wanted to speak today about the struggle that we went through as a staff as well. We talk about productive struggle with our kids and the benefit of it, but we really could see it. It came to life for us as we were working on this, because like Jennifer said earlier, by talking about the teachers feeling a bit overwhelmed, well, we as a staff at KVEC also felt a bit overwhelmed when we were given the charge to develop these micro-credentials, because we really didn't have a great deal of knowledge about them. But Jennifer and Robert followed a beautiful instructional model of explicit instruction of Dr. Anita Archer's, as they would, they chunked the learning for us. They gave us examples and non-examples. And as we were doing the learning and as we were producing, there was that constant feedback and the conversations back and forth with us. And then to take it a step further, we actually would go out, we would get our learning, we'd get as much as we could understanding, and then we'd go relay that to the teachers that we were working with. So it was just a beautiful model of an instructional practice in the classroom as well. So as I reflected back over it, when we got that finished product, I thought, yeah, that's what we did. We went through that instructional, that explicit instruction model. So it was definitely a learning process for all of us, but I feel that we have learned a great deal. And for teachers that have actually done a micro-credential, I think producing a micro-credential would be even easier for them, because they understand those components if they've actually experienced that.
Thank you, Vonda. Thank you, Danny. So those were just a few of the reflections that we had about some lessons learned as we went through that process and that development of the micro-credential. But now on this next slide, we'll take a look at, I want to share with you a couple different things here. One, if you'll see on the left side, this is the Holler, which is the holler.org. And I know we've talked about that a few times in our session today, but this is our place-based social learning platform that we use. And so we have the development of 12 micro-credentials in the area of special education. And you can view those videos here when you get an opportunity to look at those, if you want to get some deeper understanding of those, or be able to hear. And I'm going to share with you today on this video one that's specifically with a special education teacher and a team member here from KVEC. And it was the one that's talking about using the question formulation technique and how that was applied in the content area of mathematics for students with disabilities.
So Emily, you chose to do the question formulation technique in math.
Yes.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Why did you decide to do that micro-credential?
So looking at math classes, I mainly collab in geometry-based classes and Algebra 2 with special education population. And so looking at that, our numbers are generally pretty high. We might have, let's say, 27 kids in the class, and about 13 to 15 are special education population. So really wanted to find something that was impactful for my kids to look at new content and how to take it and put it into their terms and help them learn it more, and something that they can grasp quicker and easier rather than just the classic sit and get.
So what does an earner have to do if they want to do this micro-credential?
So there's 3 parts. The first part is they have to write a narrative format and explain that they understand QFT and all the portions of it. The second part is a video of them in a classroom going through all the QFT focus, their Q focus, and going through the lesson and working with the students and everything that goes along with that. And then the third part is another narrative format, looking at what QFT is and how the reflection on it and how it worked in the class, and maybe some data that they have and things of that nature.
So why do you think the question formulation technique was so powerful for your classroom?
Well, for my kids, looking back at our reflections, especially, it's just something that it let them look at it in a different way. They were able to take it and put it into their own terms, and looking at just the Q focus and going off of that. If you look at the PowerPoint, you can see some of the Q focus types that we used. The one we used was triangle angles, and looking at having two angles and then having a missing angle. And what do we know about that? What can we draw on from what we knew previously about triangles and pulling that forward just for an example?
So there was one slide in the PowerPoint that I thought was incredibly important. What was some data that came from this experiment or this micro-credential?
So looking, and that data too came from looking specifically at the special education students and what their pre-assessment was. We do like a bell ringer at the beginning of class. And so at that point, I'm pretty sure the number was 32% is what they got correct of the whole, that special education population. And then at the end of it, we had, I think it was 97 or 98% that were correct at that point. So it's a 65% increase. And it was just as impacting as it was hearing those numbers. And that's an average across 3 classes. That wasn't just one class, that was 3. And so for me, that was just speaks volumes.
And so I think just in sharing that, the critical piece is that the special education math teacher is a regional practitioner who had implemented that question formulation technique and found that to be so effective that she used that foundation and created a micro-credential because of the impact and the success for students with disabilities. So that means really twofold, that you have a practitioner that has used that technique and has had some success with that, and then now is able to reflect on that, looking at the data that they have in their own classroom with their own students, and then being able to turn that around into a micro-credential that others can use for their own professional learning. And it really moved that question formulation technique from not just being a reading or a social studies content area, but to integrating that into math and how we can make students successful. And so I think that was, just a great opportunity that we were able to capture that we have those local practitioners who have those areas of expertise. So I think that's just something that's value added to this process. So another thing I wanted to share right here is that on our site, theholler.org, you can find our Exceptional Children link, and I'm going to share with you, let's see. Yeah. So I want to share with you what this is going to look like on this screen. So the current micro-credentials that we have completed thus far are in the special education that are connected to supporting students with disabilities can be found here. And I just want to share that with you so you could kind of take a look at that. So we have some around providing feedback to students to advance student outcomes for students with disabilities, eliciting student responses, curriculum-based measurement, and then co-teaching for educators for students with disabilities. And so another thing I want to point out here is that those are not just special education teachers, but all teachers can benefit from those because they're targeted to support our students with disabilities. And so I think that's something that we wanted to just make sure we were able to take a look at. And just for a second, I'll just let you just kind of click. I'm going to take just an example of what this looks like. I know Jennifer had kind of walked us through this process, but we can look here about the co-teaching for educators. And the reason I wanted to talk about this is one of the things that we've done to advance this work here at KVEC is talk to our regional directors of special education about the opportunity that we have for personalized professional learning for our teachers of students with disabilities, and how we can make that learning as they're thinking about and they're planning for this upcoming school year, and they're thinking about what professional development opportunities are available. I continue to encourage them to go back and look at the opportunities they have here with the micro-credential. And so this one, for example, is for co-teaching. So, co-teaching is still something that we are exploring, and we have some really good pockets of co-teaching happening, and some people are in the very early stages of planning for co-teaching. But, if that was something that a district identified as a priority need, then here would be an opportunity that both the special education teacher and the collaborating teacher, the general ed teacher, could engage in this work collaboratively and really strengthen that, because this particular micro-credential gives us information about how do we establish those collaborative partnerships, and how do we focus that work, and what co-teaching is. And the good thing about the micro-credentials is that people that may be at different entry points in their learning. And so as we look at the models and all the key components of this, we also have the research and the resources that are there, so that if we have a new teacher that may need to extend that learning, those resources and the research is there available for them, versus a teacher that is experienced and maybe they can pick up and go on and extend their learning. But here, for this example, we see those models of what co-teaching looks like, and we can help teachers understand what those most effective practices are. And so I think that, that's just, again, that's that value added opportunities for teachers. So I just wanted to share that one with you. Just and show you where you can access those from this PowerPoint. Then I have one more thing I wanted to talk just a little bit about before we transition before we transition to the next component. And this one is something that Dr. Jennifer Carroll had brought to our attention. We see that we've been able to look at both those poverty stacks, and then we've had an opportunity to look through those special education stacks for the earners. And so the poverty stack is different from the special education, as the poverty stack is a progression. So we see that builds on each of those components, or those, to make that stack. However, the special education piece is more of a needs-based stack. So in terms of, if it's co-teaching, or if it's different kinds of types of progress monitoring. So that, that makes it a little more unique. But again, I think that really is still back to the thinking around, it's personalized learning and what is appropriate for those learners. So I'm going to transition now. I know we've talked a little bit about that work from Dr. Jennifer Carroll around that micro-credentials, but we're going to have Dr. Will Cayetan going to share with us some research that's been conducted here at KVEC.
And thank you, Dion, Denny, and Vonda. That was absolutely wonderful. And Will, I think as soon as you're ready, we're ready to hear about the research you've conducted.
Yes, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Delighted to be with you here today. My name is Will Cayetan, and I am very pleased to announce that on June 1st of this year, our research on this work was published by the American Consortium for Equity in Education. And a couple days later, we were invited by the great Larry Jacobs, Dr. Desi Bowling, and I to visit with him about this piece of work. Just to give a little backdrop before I move forward, I served as an administrator and professor for 20 years at 5 different universities, from New York to New Mexico. And back in the spring of 2005, I received a position providing leadership for Morehead State University's academic outreach in southeastern Kentucky. And so that brought me back to my home state of Kentucky after being gone for 25 years. And as we moved toward this piece of work, I was joined, I would be remiss if I didn't mention 2 other great scholars in their own right, Dr. Rocky Wallace from Campbellsville University, Campbellsville, Kentucky, and Dr. Joe Blackburn, Professor Emeritus, Ole Miss, Oxford, Mississippi. And as you look at the article snapshot, as well as the Ed Talk radio snapshot, you'll see my email is there, so feel free to send questions to me after this summit, and you can download the full version of the scholarly article. I served as the senior researcher and author of this piece of work, and you can download the entire article from Equity and Access. And it's a pleasant, pretty quick read. And if you want a little more information on this piece of work, you can enjoy the podcast through Education Talk Radio. And that allows me to contextualize a little bit. It's really important because the micro-credential development cadre was one of 3 that my colleagues and I spent all year tracking and professionally evaluating and reviewing. It was a year-long process. And the research behind this process was very important because the Kentucky Department of Education was a partner, and KVEC, both of whom required that this research be done for professional validation. And it's also obviously very important to chronicle and document the innovative, progressive work being driven, that's the operative word, being driven by teachers and administrators in rural Eastern Kentucky. The methods used were both qualitative and quantitative, and I want to talk for a moment about the qualitative data that we gathered over the course of a year. Through the 3 cadres, we interviewed over 40 teachers, observed many of them, and administrators were very favorably disposed toward allowing us access to visit and observe teachers and their collaborators as we move through this piece of work. And for the teachers, the educators engaged in the micro-credential development portion of the work, for them, this was an opportunity to develop a micro-credential germane to the professional learning needs of their individual schools and districts. Overwhelming support from them. So now I'm going to stop this screen share and move to the quantitative portion. We obviously wanted the participants to identify the cadre that they participated in, because some teachers participated in multiple cadres. And we did breakouts in this survey by grade band, elementary, middle, and high, as well as content specialization. And there was a pretty even split between middle high school and elementary middle schools. We've got a bit of a mixture depending on the school district. And again, a breakout on years of experience. Another pretty even split between teachers with 10, 15 plus years of experience versus those with 1 to 10 years of experience. And I should note that as we scroll through this survey, you're going to see breakouts by grade band and years of experience too. And that's always wise to do, to see if you can tease out any subtle nuances in the participants' responses. But what I want to do is move to the 3rd page, because what is going to strike you is that the educators that participated in the micro-credential development initiative overwhelmingly agreed that it was a very positive experience. And I'm going to paraphrase, because even though I've enlarged my screen, it may still be a little bit difficult to see it. The RISE 2 project helped teachers acquire new instructional pedagogical skill sets. They also strongly agreed that it helped enhance their administrative and leadership skill sets, enhance their overall instructional effectiveness as teachers, help to improve student engagement in their classrooms, help to improve student learning and achievement in their classrooms. And the 6th question in this field was actually an interesting statement. The RISE 2 project has made no tangible improvement to my capacity to improve my instruction or student learning. Overwhelmingly, educators responded that they strongly disagreed with that statement. So that's a really positive sign with the research results. Then I'm going to continue to move through. to show that the survey gave us some very telling breakouts by grade band. And we had really good participation. And Likert scales, depending on who's developing the survey, for this survey, 1 was strongly agree, 7 was strongly disagree. That can be a little bit confusing at times. Sometimes it's inverted. But moving, I'm gonna go ahead and work toward the end of my share out. Page 8, which is the second field of a set of questions that we asked educators to respond to. And you can see all those very large, strongly agree bars. That's a very, very positive sign. And there were 3 questions that educators were asked. I feel I have improved as an educator as a result of the RISE 2 project, which the micro-credential development process was a part of it. They valued the experience of the RISE 2 project. And there is no greater affirmation than when educators overwhelmingly agree that they would recommend the micro-credential development process to other teachers, schools, and districts, because this finding speaks to the relevance and practical usage inherent in the components embedded in the structure and content of the micro-credential development experience. So very positive results, and that concludes the end of my share out, and I'm happy if time permits, which we may not have time left, to address any questions. From our moderator, the great Robert Brown.
Yeah. No, thank you, Will. I really like these positive comments. And when you look at this and you talk about the micro-credentials and the impact, and there were some questions that came out about, do we think there was impact with the data? This shows that these teachers who are involved in this is seeing a difference in their classrooms, seeing a difference in their schools, having conversations with principals. They're showing a change in the learning culture, a learning climate of their schools. And this is just not happening here in conversations with other folks across the states. That is occurring in different places as well as in Kentucky. So I do want to thank, at this time we are running out of time, but I do want to thank all of our presenters for doing an outstanding job. And one of the things, and I said this at the beginning, looking at micro-credentialing and part of a professional learning system, having a cadre of folks come together and not working on this in isolation develops a wonderful system of professional learning. Micro-credentials is a great component of a large system, but it's an important component. And as we move forward with our summits in the future, many of these will be defined in different aspects. For our next section, we have a panel coming up. The conversation around the design principles was discussed today, and there were questions about that. Our July 28th session will be on the design principles and how these were created. Then in July, we'll be talking about how micro-credentialing has an impact on leadership. And then finally, there were questions about what's happening around the states. We will have a large state panel of about 7 or 8 folks from different places across the nation to talk about how micro-credentials are being used for relicensure, for recertification, which includes some work that's going on in Kentucky around that as well. So we're excited about our upcoming work and of what's happening now, and we appreciate everyone who was on today. And we will get this video sent out to you. It has been recorded, and we will send this to you. Looking forward to our next session for July 28th. And